how the cinema people do it. You know? Okay. All right. We are looking at Dejection and Ode by Coleridge. And that is on page 484. We just got started. And again, I said at the end of the last class, on page 484, Dejection and Ode, I said that this is literally Coleridge's version of Wordsworth's intimation ode and just of a crisis ode in general. And I mentioned that, if you remember, the intimation ode, he wrote stanzas 1 to 4 in 1802, and then he put it away for 2 years and didn't pick it up until 1804 with that whole pre-existence idea. Right? Okay. Now, here, Coleridge actually heard Wordsworth read out loud to him the first 4 verses, and that inspired him to write his own version. Except his crisis is a lot deeper than the crisis that Wordsworth. And part of the reason we said at the end of last class is that Coleridge clearly suffered from clinical depression. Right? And we saw that it's so powerfully described. Well, just starting at the very bottom of page 44, the end of stanza 1, again, those sounds which oft have raised me while they awed and sent my soul abroad, might now perhaps their wonted impulse give, might startle this dull pain and make it move and live. And where we said, whereas regular depression is sometimes a sort of hot pain where you're crying and weeping and stuff like that, often clinical depression is a dull kind of pain. You're actually not crying. If you could cry, it would help, but you feel sort of trapped. Like you're, people describe it like being in a pit and you can't get out, right? And this is where we left off. Those first 4 lines of stanza 2 on page 45, again, to me, read like a textbook definition. A grief without a pang. So there's a grief, but it's a deadness, right? Void, dark, and drear, empty, stifled, drowsy, unimpassioned grief. Which almost sounds like an oxymoron, right? Because grief is usually, right? But that's the horror of this. It makes it so difficult. It makes it like it's pressing down on him. Like all of his will and passion and emotion has been sort of squeezed out. So sometimes when you see somebody that's clearly depressed, they will look very chalky. Like their skin will look very chalky. Because again, it's difficult, right? It's a draining away of emotion, and like I said, I mean, he clearly felt this, Coleridge. One of the reasons why he was taking things like opium, which he thought would help him, right? Which finds no natural outlet, no relief in word or sigh or tear, right? Normal depression, tears help, right? Or sighs, or just words, but you just feel trapped. Right? And again, what makes it so worse, when you're that depressed, all you want to do is sit in a little dark room alone, and that's like the worst thing you could do. You need to get outside, get fresh air, talk to people, just get out, right? And more were trapped inside. It's sad to say, but they say suicides have been up since the quarantine. I don't know how long it's going to last. We'll see. Okay. Then he says, "O lady, in this wan and heartless mood." Now, he doesn't mean heartless like cruel. He means almost literally heartless, right? To just no emotion. To other thoughts by yonder throstle wooed, all this long eve, so balmy and serene, have I been gazing on the western sky and its peculiar tint of yellow-green. So he's just gazing and gazing, waiting for something to spark some feeling and life in him. And still I gaze, and with how blank an eye. I gaze and gaze, but nothing is rejuvenating or restoring or energizing me. Nothing's happening, right? When people still do that, they say you need to be energized, and like jab you in the sides. Will they do that anymore? Energized. Don't do that, it bothers people. When I was a kid, that's what everybody would do. And those thin clouds above in flakes and bars that give away their motion to the stars. It's kind of cool when you look at the night sky and trying to figure out what's moving. Have you ever been that when you get in your car and you haven't started the car yet, but the guy behind you backs out, and for a second you feel like you're moving? It's like disorienting. He's kind of playing on that. What's the word? Optical illusion kind of thing. Those stars that glide behind them or between, now sparkling, now bedimmed, but all we see is describing all this beautiful natural beauty that should make any romantic poet smile, right? But look what happens. Yon crescent moon, as fixed as if it grew in its own cloudless, starless, as if it grew in its own cloudless, starless lake of blue. I see them all so excellently fair. I see, not feel, how beautiful they are. That's that fear that Wordsworth has in the intimation. Oh, how terrible it would be if I was cold and all the world was rejoicing around me. Right? That's the worst thing. It's okay for a romantic to feel but not see, right? Because as we already saw in Wordsworth's preface to Lyrical Ballads, a romantic poet has the ability to be moved by absent things as if they were present. Right? So it's okay to feel but not see, but to see and not feel, like death for a romantic. Okay, now stanza 3. My genial spirits fail. Now, we use genial for genial is also the root of the word genius, the part of me that's alive, my spirits that are light and filled with joy. My genial spirits fail. Abigail, do you know why angels are able to fly? This is G.K. Chesterton. Because they take themselves lightly. What wonderful thing. You might have heard that phrase before. It's from Chesterton. Again, we're so weighed down and heavy, and we take ourselves so seriously. My genial spirits fail, and what can these avail? These seem to be the things he's seen. To lift the smothering weight from off my breast, it were a vain endeavor, though I should gaze forever on that green life, that green light that lingers in the west. I may not hope from outward forms to win the passion and the life whose fountains are within. Now, actually, Abigail, last class, you saw where we were going. This is what I called, I'll say it again, this is the dark side of the externalization of the internal. Or, another way, it is the externalization of the internal with a vengeance. Right? Again, going all the way back to Blake. And this is what I meant when I told you about the test. I'm only going to give you one quote from Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley, and Keats. But please study everything, because, in Blake and in Frankenstein, there are some themes that I want you to know, because that's what you're doing. Basically, in your little one-paragraph analysis, you're telling me what it means to the poet, but how does it embody themes that are important to the poet, but also to the Romantic age, right? So one of the things we learned from Blake was the whole externalization of the internal, the whole idea of what innocence and experience mean. We also learned about Orc. We learned about the Byronic hero. That's what I mean by make sure you study all of your notes, but then I'm going to give you quotes from those poems. And again, I'm going to tell you what poem it is. You guys are lucky. Normally when I do this in paper and all that stuff, you have to tell me the poet and the poem, but I thought we're under enough stress. But that does mean that I'm going to expect your paragraphs to be really good. Okay? But yeah, I decided we don't need that. And also, I don't want you to despair your way into, cheating. I don't want to push you so far that you don't cheat, okay? But you push people too hard, okay? So study those and get to know those poems, right? And always it's going to be something I would most of the poems are short anyway, but say the rhyming that was long, there were parts of that I didn't read out loud. So I'm not going to give you a quote that I didn't actually read out loud and talk about in class. Right? I mean, like I said, most of the poems are so short we actually read the whole thing, but there are parts of poems where we didn't read every little part of it, focusing on the important stuff. Okay, so the externalization of the internal, again, going back to Blake, is the idea that we take what's inside of us and we project it onto the outside world, whether we're in a state of innocence or experience. If you're in a state of innocence or just any kind of joy, it's great because nature is alive around you. But what happens if you're dead inside? That means that if you're dead inside, nothing from the outside world can restore you. You can only project your darkness onto it. Right? So, again, I may not hope from outward forms to win the passion and the life. I can't get the passion and the life from them, because what is the source of the passion and the life? Its source is what? Good, it's your own, it's internal, right? The fountain of joy and life is an internal fountain. That's why it's so important that what does Jesus promise the woman at the well in John chapter 4? I will give you living water. You'll never be thirsty again. And remember how he describes it though? The reason you'll never be thirsty again is I will give you living water that will be like a fountain within you springing up to eternal life. What a wonderful promise, right? In other words, you will have control of it. It won't be outside of you. Can you imagine how much work it would be to every day you go and get the heavy jars, you bring the water back, and then it runs out. You got to do it all over again. I mean, it's bad enough that you have to wash the dishes every day, right? But imagine heavy carrying of water and only having it run out. Right? It's like, mowing the grass and it just grows back. Stuff, right? So, the fountain, the source, is ultimately internal. And that's why, O lady, we receive but what we give. We can only get back what we've given, and in our life alone does nature live. Ours is her wedding garment, ours her shroud. In other words, it's the internal state that's determining whether this is going to be a marriage or a funeral, whether it's going to have the ending of a Shakespeare comedy or the ending of a Shakespearean tragedy. But there's something else that's really cool about this passage, and I wonder if any of you picked up on it. He says, it were a vain endeavor, though I should gaze forever on that green light that lingers in the west. Does it remind you of something?
Yes, Great Gatsby.
This, nobody ever talks about it, but this is really the whole origin of the Great Gatsby. Because F. Scott Fitzgerald was a huge fan of the Romantic poets. In fact, one of his books is titled, one second, wait 1 second, it'll come to me. Oh my gosh, wait 1 second. Tender is the night. And that is a direct quote out of a poem that we're going to read, The Ode to a Nightingale. Tender is the night. Already with thee, tender is the night. So anyway, I mean, what is that green light? Is it money? What is it? Okay, it is ultimately a reference. Now here, literally, it's kind of the sun, the sunset he's looking at. It's beautiful. But I would argue that the entire theme of The Great Gatsby, what is greatest about this book, is it is an enlargement of, it were a vain endeavor, though I should gaze forever on that green light that lingers in the west. Okay, this is what everybody remembers about The Great Gatsby. What does Gatsby keep throwing? Parties. Huge parties, right? And it seems like he thinks if he throws the parties, it will bring him back to life. Maybe it'll bring Daisy too, but it's like he thinks it will bring him to life. And everybody has a great time, but it doesn't work. Because he's dead on the inside, okay? He needs Daisy. And he can gaze and gaze and gaze, but if he's dead on the inside, it's not going to rejuvenate him. And to me, that's the core of that. And Nick trying to understand Gatsby. That's the problem. He's dead on the inside. And if you've ever seen the old movie version with Robert Redford, you see that? One of the best things is it's got a song by Irving Berlin. It's a theme song. And the words are, what'll I do when you are far away and I am blue? What'll I do? What'll I do, okay? What'll I do with just a photograph that's held by... When she's gone, nothing can rejuvenate him. And he thinks the parties will, but they won't. Okay?
Prior to the Caribbean.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
There's a flash of green light when the ship of the dead passes back in the water.
That's cool. Now, of course, if that was a reference, that would more likely be Gatsby than the poem. But yeah, that's true. It's something that you just keep staring at and longing for, right? Like the moth yearning for the moon. It's not going to reach the moon. It might reach your porch light, but it's not going to reach the moon. But it keeps wanting to get there, right? And that is, it is an image of longing, right, and nostalgia. But here it's even deeper. The depression here is even deeper than it is in Gatsby. Gatsby wants something he can't get back, and even when he gets Daisy back, it doesn't work. He tries to bring everything back, to kickstart himself. But again, ultimately it resides inside. You need to come alive within, and then the world around you will do it. You can't do it. We keep trying. It would almost be like taking drugs to restore that free spirit you had when you were a kid. But it's not going to do it. Right? You need to get that free spirit back and then project it into the world. And so, again, it's a very powerful poem, but again, there is a dark side. It's fun to live by inspiration, but the dark side is when the inspiration doesn't come. As we said in the last class, it's good to be a poet-prophet, but the dark side is that if you swallow orc, you may end up being cut off from everyone. So you now have the power, but like the Byronic hero, you have power, but no companionship. Right? You're cut off, you're alone, you're isolated. And there's so often that feeling of isolation there. Now, poor Coleridge hasn't really done anything wrong, right? But, I mean, he's caught in there and is unable to break out. So, in our life does nature live. We're ultimately the source. That's what I said. Romantic poets are nature poets, but they're not so much writing about nature as the way they feel about nature and what they're projecting onto nature. Right? Think of the two rain poems. Right? Okay. He says, and would we aught behold of higher worth than that inanimate, cold world allowed to the poor, loveless, ever anxious crowd? These poor people that have lost their childlike sense of wonder and awe, the busy, anxious crowd, the ones that are caught in savage torpor. Remember that phrase from the preface to Lyrical Ballads. All that they see when they look at the world is what? What do they see? What does it say in the Pope? All they see, the anxious crowd always worrying. Wordsworth has a famous poem, the world is too much with us, late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our power. We get caught up. Most men live lives of, what did Thoreau say? It's also in Dead Poets Society. Most men live lives of quiet desperation. You ever heard that? It's from Walden, the Thoreau. Most men live lives of quiet desperation. I want to suck the marrow out of life. Did none of you saw Dead Poets Society? Okay, if you remember, they in that book he said we would always start the Dead by reading that line from "We want to suck the marrow out of life." Right? Carpe diem. I like that movie. Okay. All that they see is what? So in the poor, anxious crowd, what do they see in the world? Nothing but see the words? All they see is an inanimate, cold world. Because they're ever anxious, cut off from themselves. When they look out the world, all they see is something cold and inanimate. What does inanimate mean? Not alive. Okay? So rocks are inanimate, ultimately. Trees aren't. Animals aren't inanimate, but if you're dead inside, that's all they see. It's as if the whole world is just rocks and stones, dead things. Right? Does the potato scream when you throw it into the pot? People talk about that. Don't eat anything living or something like that. Potatoes. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, thank you, got it. Very good. I like that. One of my daughter's favorite lines. She always says it. Of course, unfortunately, my other daughter's favorite line is she'll often say, "Well, boys, looks like meat's back on the menu." Scares me every time she says that. With lick smacking, you don't say that, or do you like that? I like it.
Convocations yesterday.
Oh yeah, there's still convocation going on. I didn't even know what was going on. It's all by Zoom, or is it? Oh, you are live. Oh.
Social distance is the best you can.
Oh,
We
yeah.
had a lady come who spoke about her missions work in refugee camps and internally displaced people camps in South Sudan and West Africa places.
Wow.
And she was talking about how they have no concept of peace. She quoted the line from Lord of the Rings: "Some things that should not have been forgotten were lost."
Oh.
In that context.
Cool.
And none of her lecture had anything else to do with Lord of the Rings. And so I was like, oh,
Well, that's cool. Just trying to say, oh.
It was really
I like that. It just kind of wakes you up. It's unexpected. It's unexpected. So it's always good to play. And I've done this now because a lot of times I'll give the graduation speech for like the classical Christian schools, and I just memorize the whole speech. Remember, I can't do this, Sam. I know, it's all wrong. By rights, we shouldn't even be where we are. It's like in the great stories, the ones that really mattered. You know, the whole speech I memorized, and I'll often end by challenging them with that speech, right? What are we holding on to, Sam? Nobody knows? Yeah, that there's still good in this world, and it's worth fighting for. Now, to be honest, that line is actually not in The Lord of the Rings, but it's a good one. I mean, most of the stuff they made up, I think, is quite good, and I think it fits. A lot of it they put together, but that actual line is not in there, but it really is powerful.
I saw a joke where it said the moral of the Lord of the Rings is that there's some little bits of good in this world that's worth fighting for. Whereas the moral of the Silmarillion is that there's 3 little bits of good left in the world, and they're absolutely not supposed to be worth fighting for.
Oh, okay. There's some really Joel. That's good. I never heard that one. That's good. The Silmarils, man. And the 2 guys get them, and one of them like burns his hand, and he throws himself in the ocean. And the other guy throws himself in like a volcano, basically. And, yeah. So you see it. It's like the 4 elements, right? Because one, jumps into a volcano. That's like the earth and the fire. The other one drowns, and the other one is up in the sky, in the air. So.
You get earth and fire for one jewel.
Yeah. As the nerds go off on their Lord of the Rings. Great stuff. Okay, so again, as if, and would we ought behold of higher worth? What he's basically saying is, you, and he doesn't identify the lady, some think it's his wife, some think it's, poor Coleridge. This poor guy. Okay, does anybody know what utopian socialism means? Okay. Have you ever heard it? There were actually attempts in the 19th century to set up perfect communes, like ideal places. And one of them was set up in America, and it was called Harmony. It's the one that, it's less read today, but what's the guy's name? William, hold on for a second. The guy who wrote the Scarlet Letter. Hawthorne. William Hawthorne. He wrote, Nathaniel Hawthorne, William was Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote a book called The House of Seven Gables, and it's partly about that community that finally folded. And they tried to do a lot, many of them in America. And the idea was everybody just does the job they like. And I remember reading some, and because children love to play in dirt, they will take care of the sewage. I mean, they're setting up these perfect communes, right? Well, anyway, Coleridge was going to join one called Pantasocracy. It was going to be in America. He was all ready, but everybody had to be married to do it. And so he got married rather impulsively, and it turned out to be pretty unhappy for both of them. And then the whole thing fell apart anyway. And then, to make it worse, he fell in love. He didn't cheat on his wife, but he fell in love with Wordsworth's wife's sister, whose name was Sarah, which was the same name as his wife. Anyways, so I know, very confusing. So in earlier drafts, he actually says William instead of the lady. Then it seems like he decided to just make it generic. I don't want it to be one specific person, and just sort of make it generic. Right? So anyway, so he says, so basically, we, the 2 of us, you, my friend, we have always saw more in the world than these other people did. But now, have we been reduced to that all we can see is what the poor, loveless, ever-anxious crowd sees? From the soul itself must issue forth a light, a glory, a fair, luminous cloud. And it's interesting that he uses the word glory. Does that have some link to the intimation zone? What did Wordsworth used to see everywhere? The intimation zone. What did he see around everything? Good, the corona. Now you'll remember that, right? That sort of glory, that wreath around it. Then later on, though nothing can bring back the splendor in the grass, the glory in the flood. That's gone. Okay? But he used to see that penumbra, there's a fancy word, around everything. Right? Anyway, he says, a light, a glory, a fair, luminous cloud enveloping the earth. Again, he's got Wordsworth's poem in mind. He says, and from the soul itself must there be sent a sweet and potent voice of its own birth, of all sweet sounds, the life and element. So, the ultimate source has to be from within, the light, the glory, and again, he's not saying that God cannot do this, but again, he feels trapped inside of himself and unable. He's now in that dead, cold world, and he's lost his connection with the natural world. Right? Now, nature is just a dead thing. Okay. For most modern people, especially modern science, the universe is just our house. But for the medievals, the universe was their home. What do you think I mean by that? What's the difference?
They had more, if we're thinking of like in the more traditional Christian, like medieval world sense,
right?
Like where they believed that the earth was the center of the universe,
okay,
and
right.
it had been specifically crafted around them to contain them and hold them, and for them to live in by God. Then that, I guess, would be part of it.
Good.
Probably, is then like we're not just randomly moved into here. But like,
Right. This is a place. Good. It's made for us. Good. They used to believe that the universe, as it moved, actually influenced us. It shed his. It's where the word influenza comes from, which is where the word flu comes from. But it shed its. So the universe, we were in sync with it. We lived in a sympathetic universe, right? That's moves back and forth with us. And if you want proof that we do live in a sympathetic universe, what causes the tides? The moon. Did you ever think how weird that is? Did we talk about this before? This hunk of rock, I think it's about 250,000 miles away, the moon. And it causes the tides? So some gnarly dude in California can ride the waves? I mean, it's weird, right? It's almost as if they're courting each other, right? Back and forth, back and forth. And we've lost that. Lewis and Tolkien were both influenced by a guy named Owen Barfield. And he wrote a book called, have you heard? He wrote a book called Saving the Appearances, Owen Barfield. And he talked about how we've lost our original participation, where, again, we look on nature not just as a dead object, but almost as a subject, something that's linked to us. And we've lost that. We're no longer in sync with it. We've been cut off from the world. Now, today we think of anybody that wants to talk about being in sync with the nature as like a New Ager or something like that. But that's because, as I said in one of my speeches, the modern world has killed the heavens, killed the universe, and the church has performed their funeral. Because the church, more Protestants now, Baptists stuff, we're more guilty of, we don't like this nature talk. We're scared of it. Okay, but no, God made the universe and God made us, and so we're in sync with each other. Now, we shouldn't believe that the stars control us, but they do influence us. Right? That's what they used to believe. They influence us. Where Narnia is a place like that. Okay, the Fall, yay! Did you have Narnia? No, you didn't have Narnia yet. You just had the C.S. Lewis class. Are you going to still be here though in the fall? Okay, I don't know if you have any room though. You might have any room for electives, but we will do Narnia 1 year from now. Hopefully, be around, and that's fun. It counts for an English major, but it also counts as an elective, or even like if you're a writing major, you need some Englishes too. It counts for that stuff. Save the day. Oh, I love that. Save the day. So we'll get you all of it. That'll be fun. Narnia. Oh, I love it. Anyway, I've lost my place now. Was that? Go ahead.
In the Magician's Nephew, when they're Aslan creating the world, and Uncle Andrew convinces himself he doesn't see it.
Good.
He actually doesn't see it. That's the external.
Actually, that's a great point, right? The trouble with trying to make yourself stupider than you are is you very often succeed. Okay, in The Magician's Nephew, Aslan creates Narnia out of his head. It's the most beautiful thing. And everything's going, and then he creates the animals, and then he allows certain animals to talk. But Uncle Andrew, who's the evil, the Byronic hero, really, the Ubermensch, right? He refuses to believe that animals can talk. Now, this is impossible. And he so refuses it that he can no longer hear them. All he can hear is growls, and when they laugh, it's like, they're like hyenas, and he's terrified. And that's the line where it says, the trouble with trying to make yourself stupider than you are is you very often succeed. Did you girls like to say that when you were young? Boys go to Jupiter to get more stupider, and girls go to college to get more knowledge? Did you say that? Yeah. My daughter had a pillow that said that. She really liked it. Drove my son crazy, right? Yeah. Girls go to college to get more knowledge. Boys go to Jupiter to get more stupider. Oh, there we go. Oh, see, they did it. My father said when he was young, he was in school, and my father's name is Tom, and somebody wanted to make fun of him, so he wrote on the board, Tom is dumb. D-U-M. Anyway, I've lost my mind now. Speaking of Narnia, to give us a little more understanding of this. In Voyage of the Dawn Treader, they meet a magician named Ramandu. But that magician is also what? Yeah, he's a fallen star. He's come down, right? Well, yeah, he's the retired star. That's Corey Aiken's the fallen star. That's right. He's the star. And when Eustace Clarence Scrubb, the boy who has no imagination, when he hears that in Narnia stars are people, basically, he says, "Oh, sir, where I come from, a star is nothing but a flaming ball of gas." Oh, to you, Pumba, everything is gas. Anyway, a star is nothing but a flaming ball of gas. And do you know what Ramanu's answer is? Excellent, good. Even in your world, that's not what a star is, only what it's made of. And again, part of it is because we now know how things are made and composed, we think we've explained them away. Right? And this is what happens. We no longer see the magic and mystery around us. We've lost that participation, and we're cut off. We've turned the nature into a thing. Right? The trouble is that once you turn nature into an object, you will turn man into an object. That's what happens next in all the sort of communist revolutions where you're a cog in the machine and you are programmed and things like that. So the Romantics were, in a sense, the first real critics of the dangers of the 18th century Enlightenment, the dangers of a materialistic science that gets rid of all the spiritual aspect, right? What they call scientism, rather than just science. And they just crushed it. So that there are many people today that will tell you there is no difference between. Have you ever heard the phrase mind and matter, or brain and mind? They will say there's no difference. What you call the mind is your brain. There's nothing different. Everything is ultimately physical. And so you don't see it, and you miss it. You miss the wonder and glory around you. O pure of heart, thou needst not ask of me what this strong music in the soul may be. What is this thing in the soul that will allow you to bring the world to life? Now, first time I read this poem, it's like, okay, this is a romantic poem, so the answer is either imagination or love. But he surprises us and he says something else. What and wherein it doth exist, this light, this glory, this fair luminous mist, this beautiful and beauty-making power, joy, virtuous lady, joy that ne'er was given, save to the pure and in their purest hour. But for romantic, ultimately, joy equals love equals imagination. What do you think those things have in common? Imagination, love, joy. What do they all have the power to do? But to transform. Transform, unite, make something new, affect a marriage, bring that word you heard me use before, esemplastic, the ability of the imagination to shape into one, to take disparate objects and bring them together. That's what a good matchmaker does. You're not a matchmaker, are you, Abigail? Okay. A good yenta, a good matchmaker, like sees a boy and a girl that nobody would think they had anything in common, but somehow she sees something in common and brings them together. Okay? Kind of cute. Well, Emma thinks she's a good matchmaker, but she messes up, doesn't she? Yeah, she ends up messing up things. So, no. Well, of course, when we say that, I think of a Fiddler on the Roof, right? The Yenta. Matchmaking. Because remember, playing with matches, a girl can get burned, right? So maybe we'll wait off, okay? He's handsome and tall, at least from side to side. He's got a temper, he'll beat you every night, but only when he's sober. So you're all right. Oh, man. Watch out. Which what is? So yeah, it's just great. All right, we'll test you, Rabbi. Is there a proper prayer for the Tsar?
I only know the one matchmaker song. I didn't like the movie when I
You didn't like it? Well,
I was young.
you get a little older.
Jackson's daughter is terrible.
Especially if you're a young boy, it's like, this is the most boring thing I've ever seen in my life, you
So
know?
my brother, who hates music,
But he liked it?
except for the Fred Astaire show,
Oh.
he musical.
Oh, that's good.
Fred Astaire is amazing.
He's good.
Everybody's got to admire that. What's his name? He likes the L'Chaim to Life.
Oh, to life, L'chaim. We probably like when they're all doing the Russian kicks and stuff like that. Yeah.
It's so weird because some people hates music.
Yeah.
It's like singing the rain is okay. Shall we dance with Fred Astaire? Excellent.
See, that's good. That was all the good one.
Fiddler in the Roof,
Top hat.
plus.
I guess when you're a kid, you might have liked the dream sequence, the nightmare thing. That's pretty cool. In Fiddler on the Roof, he pretends to have a nightmare to help his daughter out. That's kind of fun.
Oh, yeah.
A blessing on your house, Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov. Okay. Hey, we're getting off here. Look at it. Anyway, so joy, imagination, love, all these powers that are synthetic, right? Instead of analysis, synthesis, instead of fission, fusion, or all the things we've said, they draw things together. And I love it. They are beautiful and beauty-making, right? So it's not only beautiful, it has the power to make other things beautiful. Just like in the Bible, Jesus has life in himself, but he also has the ability to give that life to everyone else, right? And it's meant to be sort of a paradox, right? He says, joy, virtues like joy that ne'er was given save to the pure and in their purest hour, life and life's effluence. So it's life and what comes out of life. It is the cloud at once and the shower, right? Probably, there is obviously no earthly analogy for the Trinity, but probably the best analogy that's been used for a couple thousand years is to compare God, the Trinity, to the Son. Right? So that God the Father is the Son itself, Jesus is the light from the Son, and the Holy Spirit is the warmth from the Son. And I think that's interesting, right? Because no one's ever seen God the Father, right? And none of us actually see the Son, right? We see the light that comes from the Son, right? And that would be the God, the Son, Jesus, who makes known the Father. And then the warmth and life would be more like the Holy Spirit. And again, there's no perfect, but I like that the best. And again, the Holy Spirit is, God is the source, and he gives the source. He gives life, but he also is life itself. And I love that. And there's lots of wonderful songs at Christmas time where Jesus is both the shepherd and the sheep. Right? He's both the giver of the gift and the gift. And I love that sort of paradoxical nature, right? Jesus was made by a woman that he made. It's all the wonderful paradoxes of Christmas. Mary, did you know? Like that song. You hear it so many times. It is good. That's a good one. If you want to get a friend that's like really not interested in Christianity, let him listen to that song. Nobody, people are so moved by that song they don't really know anything about Christianity. It's really good, and it's full of those paradoxes too. Right? The hands that held you, you'll hold. What was the line? That child you deliver was wonderful. Paradoxical stuff. That's the mystery at the heart of Christmas, the incarnation. Right? That's right. The hands you hold will be or the hands you hold will hold you, or hold the world, or I can't remember. Oh, that's it.
I know the whole song by heart.
But that's because you have to start in the beginning and go forward. Yeah, that's it. If you ever try to play something by memory, you can't start in the middle. Or if you want to recite a poem, I got to go back to the beginning.
That's a whole thing when trying to memorize a poem or not poem, a piece of music,
Yeah.
or at least for me with piano, where we break it up into little sections.
Oh, that's
and
true.
Practice them backwards.
Oh,
So that
you really know
like,
it.
practice this last section and then section 4 lead to it, so that if you lost your train of thought or whatever when you were playing the piece, you could keep going.
Oh, that's a cool idea. Wow. You must have had a tough music teacher, or is it your mom? Or does she actually have a music teacher?
My mother, she learned piano, but yes, my last teacher was pretty tough.
Cool.
She still wouldn't teach me theory though. For heaven's sake, she knew theory. No kidding. I was so irritated.
It's like, never mind. Okay, I'm not going to get
That's not my problem.
Oh, that's right. He said that's right. Music. Music be the food of love. Play on. You know what that's from? That version of Venice. It's actually it's 12th night. Yeah, 12th night. Beginning. You got it. There you go. The Merchant of Venice. Okay. Where was I? Okay, so again, life and life. So joy, lady, is the spirit and the power which, wedding nature to us, gives in dower a new earth and a new heaven. Okay, so joy is, and again, it's love also, because love does this, but joy is what affects the wedding of man and nature. Remember when we did the lamb, right? And I talked about bringing together the subject and object, right? Bringing together man and nature, the boy and the sheep, the subject and the object, bringing them all, the lamb, bringing them all together. And it will do that by wedding nature to us, by affecting that marriage. It will bring about a new earth and heaven. It will, in a sense, restore Eden, back to the world of innocence. Now, this is a secularization of one event in the Bible. I think we mentioned it before. How will the Bible end? But what's the very last thing that's celebrated at the end? Okay, the New Jerusalem, but we're also celebrating something. And we want to all be invited to it. The marriage feast, right? So it is the marriage of Christ and the church that will bring about the new heaven and the new earth, the new Jerusalem, all of that sort of stuff. And so, now by saying secularization, I don't mean he's being blasphemous. He's just putting it in natural terms. But it's basically what he's calling for, a great marriage that will bring the two together. Does anybody know what the word dower means? We usually use what word? Dowry. You know what a dowry is? Good. Right.
The dowry is what the girl brings with her to the wedding.
Good. And also the trousseau was like your clothes and different things like that you would bring into the marriage. And still, in traditional places in the world, if a girl doesn't have a dowry, she's not going to get a good marriage. She's not going to get a good husband or something. You need, and there are a few places that have the opposite, the bride price, where you pay. But of course, I don't know. If you're the girl, I don't know which is less flattering, a bride price, like the guy's paying for you, or you got to pay for him to take you. I don't know if either one sounds like. But I mean, seriously, in parts of the world, with no money, no dowry, no family connections, be grateful he's a man. That's also matchmaking, you know. And I'll tell you a story. This is a true story. My grandparents are from Greece, and just like people today from Mexico, they come to America, they work, they send back money to their family. He came over to America to make money, but he was sending it back to his family specifically because he had a bunch of sisters to give them dowries, so they could have. Is that a good brother or what? That's a good brother. And I remember I was telling, it's a true story, I was telling it to my son. He was just young, 7 or something, and I said, Alex. I explained it to him, and I said, now, would you do that for Stacy? And he's a very, very good guy. He's always very nice to his sister. But I'll never forget, I said, would you do that to Stacy? And then he got this wonderful little grin on his face and said, maybe he wanted to get rid of them. Great line! That's why he paid the dowry to get rid of the sisters. That's the funniest line. It was very good. It was just, it was so funny. I don't think he remembers saying, of course he's heard me tell the story many times. But yeah, that's a brother, okay? To help him get a good marriage, right? But again, that idea of dowry still there in certain places. Of course, you do understand that we still have the dowry. That's called the wedding, okay? If the father of the bride pays for a modern wedding and reception, that's more than any dowry. It's ridiculous. Now you're lucky because you're down south. People down south, you can get away with regular wedding with maybe cake and nuts and stuff. But up north, I mean, people spend, it's like $150 a person. For like if you have a reception with 100 people, you're paying about $150 per person. That's on top of the wedding and the flowers and all that stuff. I mean, it's insane. The only way you can afford it is you get married in your church and you have it in the church hall. And then you can bring your own food. Because if you go to a fancy restaurant, they're going to charge you per person. And it can be 100, it can be more than that. So, man, some people. And we live in a modern age. I wonder if they haven't finished paying off the wedding before they get divorced. I mean, anyway,
well, that's part of why people have such long engagement or whatever. Like, we're just saving up for the big wedding.
Yeah, it's like, why spend that much money? If I was living today, I'd say to my parents, give me a quick wedding and then give me the money for the honeymoon. Something like that. Let's have fun. I don't know, but up north, it's like a competition. Woo! Anyway, some places like India, the wedding will last a week.
Yeah.
Right? Now, but I have heard a few of my students that were from India. Some of them were like, "I'm going to have my reception in India because they can have a humongous reception for like a 20% of the price that it would be here." And so some of them said they got married here, but they had the reception over there because it can last for a week and everybody's going on. It's really cool stuff. But anyway, man.
Reception, they just stay up until 5 in the morning just
Singing and drinking and stuff like that, yeah. And it gets wild. That's the Italians, by the end, they do the tarantella. The dances get easier as the people get drunker. They're just kind of spinning around each other, after a while. But, they're great, cool. Anyway, so he says, okay, so which wedding nature gives in dower, in other words, sort of the gift, as it were, is the new earth and new heaven, undreamt of by the sensual and the proud. Okay, according to 1 John, there are 3 things in the world, like the 3 sins. Does anybody know what they are? The something of something, the something of something, and the something of something. When you've heard it. These 3 things are in the world: the lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. 1 John. And a lot of people think that, John probably has in mind the temptation of Eve, right? Because what does it say with Eve? It said, when she saw that the apple was good to look at and good for the tasting and good to make one wise, she took it and gave it also to her husband. So she saw that it was good to look at, the lust of the eye, good for tasting, the lust of the flesh, and good to make one wise, the pride of life. She took it. So he may have had that in mind. But anyway, lust and pride, sensual and the proud. Right? He probably has that in mind. But again, it's a little bit more of a secularization. But just like you need to be pure in that sense to enter the kingdom of God, there is also a purity, at least an internal purity, that needs to... see, there are traces of truth in every culture. Even the ancient Egyptian culture with their strange burial rites and all that sort of scary thing. Some of you know, according to the Book of the Dead, when the soul comes before whoever it is, Anubis or Isis or whatever, they will weigh your soul. Anybody know? Weigh your soul in the balance, those balances, against a feather.
Right, a feather of truth.
Right, and if it's that light, right? That's an understanding, right, of the heaviness and weightiness of sin, even in this, like most pagan of scary rituals, you see the pictures and stuff like that. There's still maybe an understanding of it. Right? It's kind of cool. Oh, that's right, yeah. That's right. Is that a Tiam? No, that's a different thing. Anubis sometimes. That's the jackal-headed one. Yeah, there's another one that... Yeah. I don't remember. Were you into Egyptian stuff?
So I was a little bit, not as much as in the Greek and Roman myths.
Right.
And then the guy who wrote Percy Jackson.
Oh!
Had the Roman section.
That's right, there's a Roman set and an Egyptian and a Norse, too.
Yes,
right?
And then he did Norse, and by then he was not writing very well anymore. I think his plots got a lot more repetitive.
Oh, okay.
And even the characters were fairly repetitive, too.
See.
When you stick with the snarky style, everyone eventually starts to just sound the same.
Yeah, no, that's true, yeah.
Everyone's the eye roll.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. They get tiresome. Oh, so that, there we go, yeah. Egyptology. It's really cool stuff. Joy is the sweet voice, joy the luminous cloud, we in ourselves rejoice. And thence flows all that charms or ear or sight, all melodies, the echoes of that voice, all colors a suffusion from that light. This is something new that's being made, a new whole, a completion, a consummation. I love that word consummation, because it can mean the consummation of the wedding, right? But we also use the word consummation, as in, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, for death. Right? But the two things, are linked in a way. Then he says, there was a time when... Have we heard that phrase before? There was a time? There was a time when meadow, stream, and grove, the earth and every ordinary sight, to me did seem apparelled with celestial light. It is not now as it hath been of yore, toward wheresoe'er I may, by night or day, the things which I have seen, I now can see no more.
Is that Wordsworth's ode?
Yeah, that's the first stanza of Wordsworth's ode. Wordsworth's ode begins with the phrase, there was a time. So you have to directly link it to that. And again, when you start with there was a time, the implication is that time is no more. Right? This is. I had one guy. He was asking. I said, the way to keep your wife in check is whenever you introduce her to people, say, "I'd like you to meet my first wife." Nasty guy. Anyway, that's right. That's a good one. This is my. I'd like you to meet my first wife. Anyway, crazy guy. Anyway, so there was a time, but it's gone now. But that time is no more. There was a time when, though my path was rough, this joy within me dallied with distress. And all misfortune were but as the stuff whence fancy made me dreams of happiness. For hope grew round me like the twining vine, and fruits and foliage not my own seemed mine. But now, okay, so up until now, he dallied with his distress because his joy was so strong and vigorous and deeply implanted that what? Why didn't he not worry about anything? If your joy is so strong, it's like, I can handle anything. I can handle a little sorrow. I can lose this. I can lose that. It doesn't make a difference. I'm so strong in the inside, everything will be fine. Well, there was a time when that was the case. When, life, was all around him, like the vine coming around. Everything was so easy and stuff. But something's changed. But now, okay, we almost might go back to the Tintern Abbey and say that time is past. But now afflictions bow me down to earth. Kind of interesting, clever metaphor, because he just talked about it was so close, it was like a vine wrapped around something. But if the vine keeps growing, what is it going to do? Straighten it, tear it down. You understand, if I ever teach Lord of the Rings again, you get a chance, what happens in Lord of the Rings, remember when the Ents go wild and they destroy Orthanc and the whole place there, right? If you really read carefully in the book, what's happening is, okay, the roots of a tree, given time, will just destroy cement and everything else. Right? Just slowly. Right? And basically the magic of that is it's just been sped up super fast. So that, now it's just crushing it like it's styrofoam, whatever we use. I don't think he would have used styrofoam. But just crushes just like it's nothing. But again, nature can do that. It just takes a long, long time. But here, sooner or later, the vines will tear you down. But now affliction bows me down to earth, nor care I that they rob me of my mirth, my joy. I don't care about but, each visitation suspends what nature gave me at my birth, my shaping spirit of imagination. That's almost exactly essenplastic. But do you notice that he just switched from what to imagination? Joy. And it's the same thing. I mean, it's like, did you forget? No, it is ultimately, all of those things are linked together. Imagination, joy, love. I mean, love ultimately is the power of marriage, right? The love is what makes two into one. The love of God, for us, is the incarnation, right? So they're all the same. Love equals joy equals imagination in the way they're being used here. So each time this new visitation of grief, and again, specifically the clinical depression, each time it comes at me, it tears away more at my joy, my imagination, my ability to reshape things. Each time it happens, right? For not to think of what I need must feel, but to be still and patient all I can, and happily by abstruse research to steal from my own nature all the natural man. This, when he says, that used to be my sole resource, my only plan, till that which suits a part infects the whole, and now is almost grown the habit of my soul. Okay, when everything was fine, he was able to just, kind of dig into his reserves of imagination and joy and all that stuff. And I could take them, right? And I had no problem. But now, I have done too much. I've actually torn. Here's the best way to explain it. Okay, you understand that if you want to retire, right, you want to have enough money in the bank and enough money in your, all your investments so that you can live on what? On the interest, right? What you don't want to do is touch the what? You know what the fancy word for that is? You don't want to use up your capital. Good, Pat. Sometimes capital principle uses words, right? You don't want to, because if you've got $1 million, it's making a lot of interest. But if you take half of that $1 million away, then you've only got $500,000 to make interest, right? So, or less, right? That's right. It keeps going down. So what he's saying is that I used to be able to live, using that metaphor, on the interest off my joy, but now I'm eating away at the capital, the principle, until it's gone, right? Have you ever heard anybody say we're living on moral capital? Okay, in other words, all of the virtue and morality, all that was saved up by our predecessors, we're eating it up, and once it's gone, that's it, right? Because what happened, right? What about all those 60s hippies and radicals? A lot of them ended up becoming pretty traditional in the end, right? Because they still had that. But, as we eat that up, once we lose that, there's nothing left. And that's kind of scary. We need to be careful. Once we eat up all of our reserves, he has been almost like a vampire, sucking out his own blood. I think of the ancient mirror. I bit my arm, I sucked the blood and said, a sail, right? I mean, he is... well, we might say he's murdering to dissect. But what he's dissecting is himself, right? More and more until it's lost and he no longer has that power, that ability to restore himself. Hence, viper thoughts that coil around my mind, reality's dark dream. He sort of turns away from it. And this stanza, I find this a little bit more random because he sort of turns away and suddenly there's a storm. Remember in the beginning he said a storm is coming. And remember that Aeolian harp we talked about? Now he calls it a mad lutenist because as the wind, it's all wild and kind of scary, like a Halloween scene and whatnot, and it just seems that it distracts him for a while. And sometimes we need to be distracted when we're feeding on our own thoughts, deeper and deeper, and just gnawing away at ourselves. And what it does is it seems to give him some relief. There doesn't seem to be an answer in the stanza, except that maybe he forgets himself for a while. Right?
Which is, you said, part of the conflict of the romantic poet is that overly self-conscious.
Good.
He's trapped within himself, so anything that's able to take him out of his own trapped soul is beneficial, even if it's not like he's noticed like joy or something.
Good. How many of you have read The Great Divorce? So you guys maybe read it FYS. Yeah, no, they changed, I know. Yes, it was, and they changed it last year or something.
FYS is just in general a terrible class.
It is, it's just the way.
I'm like, well, that's the
It's just, I don't know. I did a long time ago. I did like 10 years in a row of the old days. For a while we got to use Mere Christianity, so it was a little bit better. I mean, the only thing, I did find the strong things somewhat helpful. Your strengths. I found that somewhat helpful. Usually I just laugh at all those things, but I found that a little bit helpful. But it's still, I don't know, it's supposed to teach you skills to get you ready for college. It's also supposed to be an easy A, but some people just don't do any work and get a low grade, which is sad. Who's teaching your section?
Dr. Hartford.
Oh, it's okay.
Changing, or the due dates are not what they say on the syllabus.
Oh, no.
I'm not sure if he's playing a game with us, like he's just a lesson, or if he's literally like, I don't care, therefore it doesn't matter. And so that's what he has for the class.
I'm giving up. I don't know. It's been around for a long time.
Alright, today we're going to talk about the reading. I've never mentioned the book. Has anyone read it?
That's what Hartenberg's saying? That sounds like a Father Snell thing to say. That's pretty funny. What even Hartenberg is saying that.
Last year he said he plays this game called Find the Syllabus. And you have to see one hit. If you email him just once, he deletes the email and you wouldn't get the syllabus. But if you email him again, he'd give you the syllabus.
Oh my God.
I was sitting in class. I'm so glad you found the syllabus before you even. That's why it's pretty intense. You never know what's
Are they going to take it seriously or not? Hey, what's that? Oh, I like this. A little stuffy. Yeah, it's allergies, yeah.
So I can't sleep. Sorry about totally. I can't sleep in bed because my bed's broken.
Oh, she's probably snoring and stuff. You can't sleep. Oh no! Yeah. I was like all weekend I've been sick, and I waited and sort of isolated myself. And it's like, look, I don't have a fever. I'm breathing. This is just the same cold and allergies I get every time this year. But I didn't do anything for like 3 days to that. I even canceled one of my speeches, which I never, ever do. I've given like 350 speeches. Only one time did I ever cancel a gig, and it's because I was in the hospital with a collapsed lung. But I wrote to them and I said, look, if this was any other year, I'd just sweat it out. I've done that many times when I'm sick, and I said, what did I say? It would be morally and ethically irresponsible to put you in. So I did, and hopefully we will do it another week. But that's why. So I stayed in, and it's like, no, I'm fine. It's just the same old. It happens whenever the weather changes. It's a seasonal change, opens up all the pollen, all that sort of stuff. It just happens. And but anyway, so yeah, but I'm getting through. Getting better and better every day. Yeah, I know. And stay inside. I mean, there are a lot of allergens there. The air has been pretty bad for people that have allergies the last week. So I've been staying inside. What's that?
I'm usually not bothered by it, but as you said, the gravity is so bad.
Yeah.
I've had some like.
So I've stayed inside. Usually I take a walk to keep healthy, but don't take a walk if you're allergic to it. And that might help. I didn't think about that. Yeah, keep a mask on. But I've just been inside and So we get to stanza 8, so you're right. There's this sort of self-forget. Oh, I'm sorry. In the Great Divorce, these people in hell get to go to heaven, and when they get there, the souls of the saints try to convince them, even now, to put away your sin, put away your pride, accept grace. And there's one woman who is just so self-centered. She just can't get out of herself. And part of it, it's kind of a false humility kind of thing. And finally, one of the ghosts, one of them goes, woo, blows horn, and these unicorns come out wild, right? And what the heck was he doing? Later on, we find that he hoped that the surprise of the unicorns would take her away from thinking of herself for 1 second, and then the angels might get a hold of her. Right? It doesn't work. So what you're saying, distract you from yourself, or just. And by the way, when you have kids, that is the best way. When the kids are like in pain and they're crying and crying, don't tell them it doesn't hurt. Just distract them with like some toy or something. And that's the best way to do it. Just distract them. They won't think about it too much, right? And that's the way to do it. Make your funny faces and stuff like that. Anyway, okay. Stanza 8. 'Tis midnight. So it's still, like I said, this poem doesn't have as absolutely clear a resolution as the intimation zone, partly because the depression is so deep. But he does do something. 'Tis midnight, but small thought have I of sleep. This is the way you feel right now, Sophia. No sleep, right? He says, full seldom may my friend such vigil keep. Visit her gentle sleep with wings of healing, and may this storm be but a mountain birth. May all the stars hang bright above her dwelling, silent as though they watch the sleeping earth. With light heart may she rise, gay fancy, cheerful eyes, joy lift her spirit, joy attune her voice. To her may all things live from pole to pole, their life the eddying of her living soul. O simple spirit guided from above, dear lady, friend devoutest of my choice, thus mayest thou evermore rejoice. And I think what finally heals him is he moves out of himself with a wonderful spirit of generosity, hoping this will never happen to the lady. Right? And one thing, I don't know if you know this, but this is really true. A lot of times people that are suffering like depression or some kind of mental illness, one thing that really helps you is when you help somebody else out of their depression. I don't know if that's ever happened to you or something. A lot of times it actually helps to help somebody else. And it draws you out. And here, and we saw that same spirit of generosity. If you remember at the end of Tintern Abbey, Wordsworth turns to Dorothy and says, I hope this never happens to you. I hope you will remain ever close to nature. Okay, it's like Claire saying, I'm an old fogey now, but I hope Abigail will stay ever fresh and young. and so this wonderful sense of moving out of the self and hoping that she never feels that deep, heavy burden. So again, wonderful poem. Let me just say a few poems about the next one. I'm just going to say a few words, and then the next three classes will be Shelley and Keats. On page 792, it stands as written in Dejection. But let me just say, one of the interesting things about Shelley, and to a lesser extent Keats, but really more Shelley, is Shelley, like Byron, created many Byronic heroes in their poetry. Shelley even wrote a poem called Prometheus Unbound. But Shelley, like Byron, we're not reading Byron, but both of them were also, in many ways, Byronic heroes themselves. They themselves, would be the darlings of society, and then they would do something like, nobody has ever proven whether it's true, but it seems like Byron had a brief affair with his half-sister. And it was a half-sister that he did not grow up with, right? But anyway, what happened was, it's kind of crazy, but Byron created all these Byronic heroes, and he shot to fame overnight, and everybody loved him. And then, when it looked like he had done the kinds of things that his own heroes did, he was basically kicked out of England and never returned. He died fighting for Greek independence. Shelley, too, was in a way asked to leave and died. In fact, Byron, Shelley, and Keats all died in Europe. Byron died fighting for Greek independence. Shelley died, I don't remember where it was, in Italy. He actually fell off a boat and drowned. It's strange. It's one of those unsolved mysteries. Was it suicide? If anybody knows who the beautiful actress Natalie Wood was, she died the same way, and people still debate. Was it suicide? Did she get pushed? Was it an accident? Whatever. It's kind of weird, right? He died off, I think it was off Italy, and Keats died in Rome. In fact, you can see his burial place in Rome, if you ever go to Rome. All of them. Oh.
And Mary Shelley carried it around.
Yeah, well, what happened was apparently he died of drowning, and apparently right there on the beach, they burned his body, but one of his friends apparently reached in and took out the heart and kept it. These are weird people, romantics, okay? Yeah, very melodramatic. And when you read this poem this weekend, notice imagery that almost sounds like somebody dying of drowning. It's like almost a prophecy, but all of them ended up being that Keats so much, but particularly Byron and Shelley ended up sort of being outcasts. They were darlings and they were outcasts, and they themselves became sort of lonely wanderers. And in this poem, Stanza of Dejection, he is talking about it, and here the I, especially when we get to Shelley and Keats, the I really is them. Even in the Wordsworth and Coleridge poems, generally speaking. We could say speaker, but it's really them. They're very personal poems. And he's dealing in this poem with his own sense of being cut off and isolated. He is a Byronic hero, right? And then the other two poems we'll look at are West Wind and To a Skylark, and there we're going to see him yearning to be a poet-prophet, to rise above all of this. So anyway, good job, folks. And hopefully, again, if you didn't do the thing yet, I'll take it too. If you didn't do it, I'll send reminders, but make sure you do that little trial run, and